At the minimum, with a 15-year experience, like you said, you shouldn't even start discussion lower than 3,500 per month. And that, I'm just trying to break it into a monthly figure rather than annual
Okay.
because different cost structures, some people get bonuses, some people don't, and all of that. But if you're not able to get an in hand, a take home of 3,500 after your taxes and all of that, yeah, it's not a wise decision. But that's like the lowest starting.
So, welcome everyone to another episode of Chai Pe Kharcha. Today we have with us Abhilash Surendran. He is based in London, a very special guest and a colleague of mine as well. We are very highly interested to hear about his journey. So, Abhilash has lived a large part of his life as an NRI. He's lived in Asia and Europe as well. And of course, he's traveled pretty much in many different places. Thank you so much for joining us. And why don't we get started with just a basic introduction and tell our audiences who you are, what life was like growing up, and what your NRI journey has been like.
And thanks so much for having me, guys. And also repeating what I've shared earlier. Huge fan of this podcast. I love the idea that it brings for NRIs to have better financial intelligence and knowledge. So I have learned quite a bit from listening to various speakers on this podcast, and I feel like slightly privileged that you invite me, especially as I've shared before that yeah, I'm still a financial novice. So really happy to be here talking to you guys. As an introduction, yeah, I'm from Kerala. Pretty much lived most of my life outside. I grew up in the Middle East in Oman. My career started with the Philippines, actually. I was there for 3 years, something, and then I moved to Singapore, where I was there for close to 10 years. And then all the COVID situations happened and stuff. And when COVID ended, funny enough, I was talking to Meta about a role in Singapore, but then I think with the two events and all of that, it eventually became London. And that I was like, okay, we still have the role, but it's in London if you want to accept it. And I said, yeah, sounds good. It's a good country. I've been here before and would like to try it out. Personally, my life philosophy has always been work hard, but at the same time, work is not everything. It's not life. I have other goals in life outside work as well. I'd love to travel and visit all the countries in the world. I do travel a lot. Rohit was just sharing. So that's one of my checklists. You travel every single country in the world. I'd also like to retire early. So we've talked a lot. Me and Rohit has talked about the concept of FIRE, where you have financial independence and you're able to retire early. And that's how I was following the podcast to see if there are other people who have done that and what are the ideas that take away. So that's something that I've been keen on doing, where when I say retire early, I'd love to retire at 35 or 40, but I'm already 41, so I don't think I'm there yet. So I'm now targeting something like 45 to 50 if I can find a sweet spot based on an ideal figure to retire early and make those plans. Planning on life on that trajectory and figuring out when to take that big bang instead. That's a little bit about introductions, and I'm happy to jump into any topic specifically about London or the idea of retiring early. How am I planning for it and all of that? How do you want to structure this?
I think maybe to start off with, I know you mentioned earlier you spent some time in Singapore as well, and then after COVID, you moved to London. So, just to help our listeners give a flavor of what life is like in London versus in Singapore from like a person from an NRI perspective, somebody who's coming in from India and trying to build a life there. What has that experience been like for you?
I can give you one of some of my blunders, and that's usually I think what helps a lot of people. One of the things I did not consider when I moved from Singapore to London was the difference in tax. London is like you have 40% tax bracket, and that's something that towards the late stage of my movement is when I was like, oh, I got to factor the tax part in, and also the prospect of avoiding double taxation between India and UK. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of documentation required there. I did manage to do all of that, but it was like last minute hurry burry. When in hindsight, when I look back, I'm like, oh, I should have planned for this from the very beginning when we started thinking about moving to London. So that's one key difference, especially when you move from Singapore to London. The tax difference is significant, and that the second is weather. Right, Singapore only has two seasons. As I say, there is summer
Exactly.
and then there's very hot summer. In London, 4 different seasons. So when I first moved here, I remember I had nothing called winter clothing. I like one small down jacket. That was all I had. And I think I moved here like November 2022, which was like the winter is just peaking in. And my first 1 month was just shopping hotel, everything that you need for winter. And I was super unprepared for that. The third is the general lack of, not lack, the general sense of safety, which in Singapore, you go to a hawker center, you just leave your wallet or your phone on the table and you're like, so it makes you slightly complacent when you like travel elsewhere where there could be petty crime, there could be like, London is not dangerous at all, don't get me wrong, but you don't want to like be a victim of opportunist crime where you're just leaving your wallet somewhere or your phone somewhere or just flashing your. So that has been a huge mindset change where when in Singapore, you don't think about all these things. You leave your stuff anywhere that things are safe. Nobody's going to pick it up. Even if they do, they find you and return it back to you. London, you've got to be careful of opportunist crime, which if you are very careless with your stuff, there's all these changes that happen. And yeah, I think these are the three, at least in my initial couple of months of moving here, the three key differences between Singapore and London. I had to adapt my mindset to that was this. And lastly, this is interesting. When I lived in Singapore, I used to think Singapore was the most multicultural country in the world. I revised that opinion when I came to London. I think London is definitely the most multicultural city in the world because Singapore has a huge diversity in terms of Asian cultures, European cultures. But London also brings in all the Caribbean, the African influences and all of that, which you don't find so much in Singapore. So when I moved here, there was like, I was thinking, well, I moved from Singapore. I know all the cultures, but then you're introduced, my next door is a Jamaican restaurant, next to the Ethiopian restaurant. These are stuff that you don't even see in Singapore. So in terms of diversity, it was like one step ahead. But I think Singapore prepped me well by introducing me to a lot of different cultures and the new ones that I was meeting here. That's the four I can think of in terms of when I moved, mindset changes and other. Those people are very similar. Both are big cities. Everybody's career oriented. Everybody's running, rushing. The same thing in Singapore where if you're walking slow and there's somebody who rushes you. Same thing happens in London as well. If you're walking slow, somebody's going to come behind. Oh, yeah. I'm trying to move ahead. Yeah. Otherwise, I think not a lot of differences apart from these.
And I think it's clear how some of the broader picture things of how someone might experience life in Singapore versus London, like what are the similarities and differences there? Can you maybe share a little bit about some of the more tactical items like living in Singapore, it's public transport, housing. There are specific things that you need to learn about of how to get around in Singapore. There's a lot of government housing that is available at a, not anymore, but it used to be a very decent pricing in terms of rentals. And I'm wondering what has your experience been, and specifically because you've been on both sides of the world, from like a daily commuting perspective, general shop, buying a house versus renting a house. Like, what has that experience been for you?
It's funny because I was talking to a friend about this yesterday who was visiting from Singapore to London and we were just catching up. And I left Singapore before your rental price that increase started coming in the post-COVID spike. Now, I knew my friend's apartment rental price before COVID and all of that. And now she's paying about 2.5x the same price. And I was like, I'm so lucky I left before that spike started coming in. But back then, Singapore prices, this was like pre-COVID, even during COVID times. I think it's post-COVID with all the new apartment structures and all of that the prices started really hitting high ground. I think Singapore in terms of housing was quite affordable. There was a lot of HDB auctions, depending on how your spend is. You have HDB auctions, you have private condominium auctions and all of that. When I moved to London, one key difference there is you have something in London called zones, a public transport. Say zone 1, zone 2, zone 3. And public transport in London is actually more expensive than Singapore. In fact, significantly more expensive. So for finding an apartment, one of the mistakes, again, this is one of the other blunders I did when I moved in. My first year, I stayed at Paddington, which was like a zone 1 area. The apartments were great. But then in terms of commuting time to the office, it still took about 30 minutes, give or take. But this was because I did not have a good understanding of the residential markets here, right? After a year, I was like, wait, I could spend the same amount of money that I'm spending in Paddington, move to somewhere in zone 2 or 3, as long as there's a direct metro line, which we call tube here, as there's a direct tube line to the office, and the commuting time is still the same. And the money I'm spending on my rental is absolutely exactly the same as well. That took a little bit of understanding, and you had to play around with zones. You had to play around with tube lines to see which one has a direct tube line to your office, especially now that we have the return to office requirements. And that took a little while for me to figure out. As somebody who moves here, I think I may not have had that knowledge in the first, I would say, 2 or 3 months to actually figure that out. You do need a local to advise you through the process of, hey, if my office is in location X, where should I look for my home? And what are the different financial caveats and considerations? It's always good to have a local person advising you. I think back then I had a relocation consultant, but I did not ask the right questions in terms of, I was like, I need this in my home. I need that, and I need a 30-minute commute and all of that. So given all those conditions that I had given, my consultant did do a good job. I just didn't ask the right conditions or ask the right questions. That took a while. So finding that sweet spot, I would say somewhere like between zone 2 and 3, because anything further than zone 4 or 5, your commute is too long to the office, unless your office is also in that specific zone. So you want to minimize the commute, something between 30 minutes to an hour at the max. And the prices go down the further you go away in the zone. So you're not full on in the suburbs, but somewhere within a decent enough radius. That, I think, in my opinion, that took a little bit of time. Right now, I'm like a Finsbury Park, which is still a 30-minute commute to the office. That took a while to figure out all of that. So anybody moving here or planning to move here, I think the best thing is find somebody who's living here locally and get the location strategy
That
with
makes
them in
sense.
advance.
And that's connected to another question for people who might be thinking of moving in is, are there, especially for, you could possibly imagine that as Indians, we may or may not have specific preferences or specific requirements in terms of what kind of housing we are looking for. And maybe there are things around, maybe there are areas where it's easier to buy Indian groceries. Maybe some people might have some religious commitments. And I know that there are areas where you might find places of worship that are easy to access based on factors. I think, are there any resources or any like forums, online communities, any kind of support systems that people might want to tap into, which would be helpful to give this kind of insight, this kind of advice? Or they might be able to get connected with people who have been here for a while and they are able to dish out like, okay, make sure you're considering these things when you're moving in.
So some of the forums that I checked back then when I was making a decision moving, there are obviously Facebook groups for Indians in London, but usually, you need to find somebody who you can talk one-to-one and go through all of these. So in the forum, you ask a question and the answer that you get could be like very diverse based on what their priorities are. For example, there are Indian communities, there are places that you can buy Indian stuff pretty much everywhere in London, but there are certain pockets where it's like also more easily available. And there's also North-South minor divide there. If you want like North Indian stuff, it's like Southall. You think about Southall or the other place close to the airport. There's a couple of other pockets in London which are like so Indian that if you want South Indian, it's East Town. It's a proper community. So you'll find a lot of like South Indian stuff, all the Kerala, Tamil, and all of those restaurants and stuff. But yeah, I think trying to find a good Facebook support group or even an internal employee resource group. But that was only after you joined the company. If you're moving to the existing company, you already have access to that. There are employee resource groups like they sees it at London Group and all of that, where you can actually ping and find somebody to advise. Block some time for a proper one-on-one, because crowdsourcing ideas, it's always a good starting point, but then you want to have a more detailed discussion in terms of help me zero in on my options. And that usually works with a one-to-one connect, which in my experience, I did that, but after I moved here, because the way I moved here was also a little chaotic. As I said, I was initially talking to Singapore and then London came at the last minute. So I didn't get a chance to do a lot of that pre-planning in advance. It was just move, and then I'm connecting with local community folks to see, hey, can you advise me what to do here? But doing that in advance, it's always good to just follow a few Facebook groups. There are people who are willing to help and provide necessary inputs. Start with crowdsourcing and then zero in on, hey, can I have a
Got it.
more detailed discussion?
Awesome. So yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Abhilash. And I think that kind of leads us to a natural point of talking about what does it take to live a good life in the UK in terms of earnings, in terms of expenses. You mentioned the tax rates are pretty high. Having lived only in, like, I actually spent a couple of years in Dublin before moving to Singapore. And one of the big reasons why I moved to Singapore was the taxation and the capital gains and all of those things. Without changing my role, without changing my grade or anything like that, just purely based on the taxation factor, my disposable income went up by something like 20% just by moving here. So I think that was one of the big reasons why I chose to move, apart from, of course, wanting to be closer to family and all those other things. So let me throw that back to you. Like, in terms of income levels, considering taxes and considering like cost of living, what would you say is like a good income level for somebody to consider moving to the UK? And then what does a general breakdown of a costs, a day-to-day living cost structure look like? Let's say just from an average perspective.
Yeah. And to answer that, I think it's also important to consider that each person's living situation is different. So my perspective may not align with somebody else. Then I have to call this out that I don't have a family. Like I'm single, not married, no kids. So my expenses are only for myself. And that is a very important factor for somebody who's moving to UK to consider. Do they have dependents that they need to take? But I can give a general breakdown that could be helpful for residents who have accommodation. If you follow the zone breakup that I actually said earlier, something around zone 2 to zone 3, like a good 1,000 to 1,500 pounds is actually pretty good. It's really good. You can improve on that and get better. And especially if you're from like a double income family, I think you can decide how much you want to go for. That's pretty good. Your transportation is going to be quite expensive. I would say it's anywhere between, based on my current spend, it's like some months it's like £100, sometimes it's like more. Yeah, it can be quite expensive to commute around here. And one interesting fact that if somebody, again, my friend I was talking to yesterday was sharing with me, in Singapore, when you get into a public bus and you tap in and you tap out. In London, you tap in, you don't tap out, because it's a flat rate. Even if you take one stop, let's say you get on a bus and you just dropping off at one stop, it's the same flat rate across for that whole bus. And it's usually more expensive than Singapore. So transportation is...
So, Abhilash, so £100 is only public transportation. So you're not counting taxis and or cars.
Transportation. Yeah.
Very expensive. Yeah.
Very expensive. Even if you take Uber and all of that, it goes up even further. I'm just referring to public transportation, like including your weekdays and your weekends, like you want to go somewhere and all of that. And a lot of things in London are quite widespread. It's a big city. You sometimes have to move around quite a bit and all of that. Yeah, assuming all these factors, I would say about £100. Dining out, definitely more expensive than Singapore. I know Singapore has an amazing hawker food culture where, it makes it easy to dine out. London, most of the time you want to plan around dining in, about making your own food and stuff. But when you do dine out, I think you're looking at anything between a 10 to 20 pound meal. And that's just not including the fanciness can change. What else comes into that? I unfortunately don't have a lot of information about the dependence expenses like children's education and all of that, because as I said earlier, utilities comes to roughly like 100 to 150 pounds. That is including power, power, gas, water, internet, all of that. And one key factor to look for when you look for a home in London is also something called the energy rating. So every British home has an energy rating depending on how new it is, how old it is, which tells you how the energy consumption is. So if you're in an energy rating A, that means you're consuming really low energy. So you can just get a £20 bill for a month or some 20 to 30 pounds. But it can go all the way to F, G. So some of the older houses, they look amazing, but then, yeah, they may have a really poor energy rating. So the electricity bill could go up to £200 or more a month. So that's a key factor to look out when identifying your home in terms of how much you'll end up spending for energy. The other utilities like water, gas, and internet, yeah, all of that combined is about £50 to £70. That factors. I don't know. What are the
Entertainment, movies, clubs.
I think pretty similar to Singapore. Like clubbing is expensive. I don't club, so I don't know. But having a good drink or just going out for a pub or something outside, I think the same as Singapore. There, the prices are not very different. Movies as well. Movie tickets are quite similar. One advantage in London, if you like to travel, is that London is also a travel hub for all of Europe and all of Africa. So my expenses, I think a good 20% every month goes on travel. Yeah, but that's also because of my priorities and what I like to do and spend in terms of entertainment. But it's easy to find cheap flights out of here. There's a lot of low cost carriers and stuff.
Abhilash, if someone this is based on what Rohit was mentioning earlier. If I am a NRI, I am a person living in India wanting to become an NRI coming to London, have 10 to 15 years of experience, what would be a decent salary to come into? And I know that it's a subjective question because the range is wide, but if considering the expenses that you have mentioned, and if I come in with the aim of saving 50 to 60% at least of my salary, what could I look at as good salary?
I'll give you a minimum figure to target. I think at the minimum with a 15-year experience, like you said, you shouldn't even start discussion lower than 3,500 per month. And that I'm just trying to break it into a monthly figure rather than annual because different cost structures, some people get bonuses, some people don't and all of that. But if you're not able to get an in-hand take home of 3,500 after your taxes and all of that, yeah, it's not a wise decision. But that's like the lowest starting point. And from there, like I said, there's a lot of different factors to consider to identify what's your ideal area to come in. But I would say a 3.5 is, if based on all the expenses I shared earlier, if you're not getting that minimum point, I don't think it's worth the discussion.
Actually, that's an interesting point. You mentioned ki after taxes, and you mentioned 45% to taxes in. So what's from a company CTC point of view, would it be like almost double of it? 7K is what company, okay.
Almost double of it. So that's where I think before finalizing any decision in terms of offers from a UK-based company, you want to convert the CTC to a after-tax figure to make sure that you're factoring that 45% tax into that whole decision.
And do you have a point of view on how does the visa system in the UK work generally for NRIs? Because I think Canada, UK, Singapore, and probably like a Dubai, like one of these Middle East countries, these are like big hubs for Indians who are looking to possibly move out of the country, maybe get citizenship, settle down in these foreign countries. What has your experience been like dealing with the visa system there, and what does the outlook look like for Indians?
So I think there's three kinds of visas, and I'm not including student visas, by the way. This is just for people who come to UK on our. There's three kind of visas. One, if you're coming with a company which is giving you an offer and going ahead, you have what is called a skilled worker visa, which the process was quite straightforward. It was like, I think in my case, Meta took care of everything and they processed all the visa requirements and stuff. But then you have, if you're coming on your own, there's two kinds of visas. There's one called the Global Talent Visa, which I think they give for very specific, and this has to come with, the process requires by getting in some kind of a government approval and all of that. But you can actually come in and say, hey, I have a specific talent, very niche, and even if you don't have a job. So there is a global travel visa. There's also an entrepreneur visa, which I think you have to show like a deposit in UK for, if I'm not wrong, £50,000, like in a local UK bank, or a commitment to put that £50,000, and then clarify what is the kind of company or entrepreneurship that you want to start. These three are the only kind of visas that I know of from a work perspective. Skilled worker visa is definitely the most easiest one, as long as you have a company that is backing you. The other two require a proper application process and going through a lot of
Right.
formalities and legalities. Yeah. And all of these, I think conversion is definitely possible. Like there are people I know who came to UK on a student visa, and then after a while they had an offer and then they moved with a skilled worker. One key thing, UK, when you change companies, you have to change the skilled worker visa as well. There's a sponsorship angle that is involved there. So you have to notify the required government and say that, yeah, I'm changing my company. And sometimes even changing roles. If you're moving to a higher role or something, you have to actually update your residence details and your skill work.
And is it relatively easy to be able to switch around within the UK, given the constraints of the visa, and how easy is it to convert into a residency or a citizenship at some point?
I haven't tried it out yet. As that. So I can't tell you from personal experience, but I do know a lot of Indian friends here who've actually switched companies and taken on different roles. I think as long as you have the sponsorship from a company, I don't think it's a difficult process. But again, not from my personal experience. It's very anecdotal from what I've
Okay.
heard from colleagues.
And this might be a little bit from the left front, but every once in a while you hear political commentary in the UK, and like immigration is always a hot topic. Unfortunately, there are a lot of disturbances, geopolitical disturbances in the region, which has had impact on things like energy supply, food security, refugee crises, and like a bunch of other things. For a typical NRI, how much does that affect on a day-to-day basis, or is there like no impact felt at all? Or do you see something changing around you, or do you experience something changing around you in terms of the cultural dialogue, or how your experience of living in the country is evolving as these different sort of geopolitical realities are manifesting around?
Actually, in the 2 years that I've been here, I've seen zero impact. Yeah, you hear all these discussions on TV and in newspaper, but you don't see anything in real life at all. And I have my own theory for this, because there's two kind of Indians in UK. There are British Indians as well here. There's a huge population of Indians who are like third generation, fourth generation. They're UK citizens and stuff. And then you have Indian immigrants, like expats who moved here, people like me. And they somehow blend and they get along very well. And I won't speak too much, but it's not like a Singapore scenario. It's very different in UK between the third generation, fourth generation Indians and the expats who moved in here. There's a lot of good connectivity. There's a lot of good relationship and stuff. And I also think that the Indian culture is there's a lot of integration with the London ecosystem itself. Like, every Britisher I know, they like their curries and they like going to like Indian events and all of that. I think the integration is a lot more better. So in real life, I've not seen any impact. You do hear a lot of geopolitical discussion, especially now because the Israel-Palestine situation. Yeah, it's everywhere. You can see that. But also protesting is peaceful. I haven't come across in very difficult situations here. I think the only thing that London has, as I said earlier, is a little bit of opportunistic crime, and that's only if you're careless. Otherwise, you shouldn't have a bad situation.
All right. I think with that, let's jump into everyone's favorite topic, fire and investments. I know you have mentioned a few times, like you think about this a lot. You have been planning around it for a while, and you mentioned you've made your fair share of mistakes. Can you share a little bit about when was the first time that you even became aware of this general concept, and maybe I don't know if it was called fire or not fire at what point of time, but just this general idea of I want to be not dependent on a job, on money, for my money and for my living. And I need to be able to prepare for it and I need to take certain steps. What was that enlightening moment for you and how has our journey been since then?
Well, when I was living in Singapore, like 2014, I was already living there for 4 or 5 years, and I was like, I'm still young. Yeah, you're traveling a lot here, but every time you travel somewhere, it's like a vacation. You have to come back. And I was meeting a lot of travelers. Singapore is also a traveler hub. Every single traveler I know, they've been to Singapore at some point, whether it's a backpacker, luxury traveler, all of that. They come there. I was meeting a lot of travelers. There's also this community. I don't know if it's called couchsurfing in Singapore. Um, so you have meetups with travelers and stuff. And I'm meeting a lot of people who are like, they've been traveling for 1 year, 2 years. And I'm like, wait, mera trip to 4 din mein ho gaya. Like I have to be back, 4 days. How are you traveling for 3 years and stuff? So I took a leap of faith in 2014 where I'm like, I'm going to take a career break. Not a proper leave. I'm just going to quit my job and see. I had a little bit of savings and I'm like, let's see how long this lasts. Let me just take a backpack and just leave. So 2014, I went on a career break, which was supposed to be, I thought it'd be 6 months. I ended up returning back after 1.5 years. I was just traveling for 1.5 years, which gave me a good idea in terms of one, if I'm not employed, how much do I need to live? Or what's your daily expenses? It also gave me a good idea of geographical differences between different. If I'm planning to, let's say, retire in Europe, that figure that I think of has to be a lot higher versus, let's say, if I'm planning to retire in like Indonesia, Thailand, or Philippines, or even India. That gave me a lot of good understanding. I did have to come back to work because by the end of it, by the end of 2015, I had finished off all my savings. I'm like, okay, I need to go back and find a job. There's not, so I came back. But it gave me an early idea in terms of, hey, at some point of time, if you want to think about retiring and with your lifestyle and what you like, these are the things you have to consider. And the first part is identifying what is your lifestyle going to be. Like, for example, I don't club, I don't like party or drink so much. I'm okay with all kind of accommodations and everything. So I'm quite flexible with that. So basically taking a checklist of all the items that are important to you. Second is planning also for emergencies. Yeah. Right now we are all healthy, but you never know. 60 comes in and something hits in. So you want to make sure that there's also a buffer. Anything that you're planning for retirement, you want to make sure that you're planning a proper emergency, not just a health insurance, like a proper fund that you've kept away just for health reasons. And coming up with and third is, figuring out where's your base going to be. And if you retire, I'm sure once I retire, I still love to travel and all of that, but you still need a place to call home to go back. And in my mind, that has always been Kerala. Regardless of where I travel, I think my base will always be Kerala. So in that place, in your base, do you have a support system? Do you have a home to go back to and all of that? Make sure you plan for these. So these are the three. Find a number, figure out how much is your emergency fund, and third, establish a base that you need to go back to. I would say 3 key principles I've been working on since 2015. I think the second and third, which is that emergency fund and the base, I think I've settled that, taken care of that now. That first one, that figure, I still have a little more to go. Once I get that, once I reach that figure comfortably, then I'm like, let's take the plunge and go for it.
It's very interesting because usually we don't hear this a lot from the people that we speak to, is someone who is to that lifestyle and then applied that real life experience for early retirement or financial independence. And so I think that's a first for me. So that is really cool to hear that you actually went into that lifestyle for a while before figuring all of this out.
And my advice on that, one of the things I know a lot of people who've done it, by the way, because it's people who actually long-term travel in India is at least a small community. You're connected. There's like traveler groups and support groups and all of that. One advice when we think, do it when you're young, because 2 reasons. One, the older you are, to return back to a career track, it becomes difficult. Like I took the break, but then because I'm still young, when I come back, I had to spend 2 or 3 months to get the next role. But once you get older and at a specific level, it's very difficult to go back and expect a company, oh, you're coming back after 1.5 years, let me take you. So it gets more difficult. That is one. And two, you have an idea of how important health is when you actually plan for longer term, this, if you're just going to be on your own. And third, it helps you figure out if that's what you want. I think, so I always advise people who are considering a gap, do it earlier so that you can plan for, is that a priority for you? How do you want to live that? How do you want to take that in an age when you're like much more older?
I think that's great advice. And now I reflect back on my own life and career journey, and I wish I had been able to do. I don't think there was anyone who was there around me to be able to advise me on something like this. But cool to be able to take a gap and be like, oh yeah, I've done that thing and I know what I want. Like now I do.
We should have written more when I was.
Exactly. So it's not like, personally for me, it's not grounded in any sort of real experience. So it's like I read about it and I talk to people and I see blogs and hundreds of YouTube channels and stuff. But I think you're literally the first person that I've spoken to who's actually done that. So we'll have time for our conversation after this for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Actually, let me also ask this, which is fascinating. So someone doing it at the age that you have said that you did it, if you had to, apart from the money piece, from the 1.5 years of travel, if you had to bring out 3 learnings, and you've mentioned health, so maybe health is one of them, but I'd let you, if you had to bring out 3 learnings from those 1.5 years, and it could be a place where you had traveled in that time, what would be those top 3 things that you thought, okay, 1.5 year में ये मैं सीख गया हूँ कि चाहिए ये होगा.
One is, I think until I took that break. So you see, before that 1.5 years also, I used to travel quite a lot on vacations, right? But when you travel on vacation, one thing that you do is you have a checklist. Ye dekhna hai, wo dekhna hai. You're like 10 things in 2 days. You just go see the sites and come back. But when you have that kind of time, you do something called slow travel, which is you immerse better in the culture. And if anything, the most important thing that has taught me is every culture there is something to appreciate in every single culture and every single country. People often ask me which is your favorite country, and I'm like, all of them. They all have something unique in them, but you normally figure out more about the culture only when you slow travel and you're able to spend considerable amount of time there. So that whole cultural integration bit is one thing I've learned which even after that travel, before I took that trip, I think a lot of my friend circle was like Indian circle. But once I travel, I'm like, I want to explore how does it feel to talk to a Jamaican? How does it feel to talk to somebody from Uzbekistan and all of that? You want to expand your cultural horizon and try things from a different perspective and POV. So that is one that I think changes quite. Second, you figure out what are the essentials you need in life. I think when we work, the kind of spend that we do is when you have a year without a job, you realize what is the absolute essentials that you need to spend on. Sometimes there's me making fun of myself. I'm like, oh man, my smartwatch is having problems. I need to buy a new. Then I'm like, wait, that year I don't even know if I had a watch in that year. Yeah, so you get a better perspective in times on, hey, for you, what are the absolute essential stuff that you need? So you become like a minimalist, where I literally was living my entire 1.5 years out of a backpack. One backpack, it had everything I need, nothing else. So now when I can compare the daily spend I had at that time, there are times in that 1.5 years that some days my daily spend is just like $10 because you're traveling some really cheap part of Laos or something like that. You can eat, drink, whatever, and you spend about $10. So that gives you a better perspective in terms of what are your necessities financially in life. And third, going back to the health thing, you're like, as long as you're healthy and you're able to maintain that lifestyle. So it changed a lot of things about before that year. I don't think I wasn't paying a lot of attention to my health. I used to party well. I used to enjoy my drinks and all of that. Not so much of a fitness person. But then after that, I'm like, as long as your health is good, I'm trying to put this in a different way. You figure out that your priorities are not the normal sense of entertainment, like having a drink or all of that. You find other ways to actually stay healthy. I think that's why, and generally just enjoy the whole process. And you also get a different perspective on work, where sometimes we think work is everything. But when you take a trip, like you're like, yeah, work is important. Like you should enjoy it. But then at the same time, it's not everything. It's just a means to get to better situations. That's amazing. So,
Cool. Let's talk some
Awesome.
numbers, Rush. I think obviously anybody who's in sort of the fire community or on a fire journey, they do some amount of maths, right? Like they figure out what's their fire number and they figure out, okay, I want to save X amount from my monthly paycheck, and something goes to investments and something goes to
yeah.
savings and emergency funds and those kind of things. What does that look like for you today living in the UK, which, as you said, like pretty high tax country, cost of living, of course, it can vary over a range, but certainly not like a cheap place to live in. Like London is one of the places it'll always feature in the list of most expensive places to live, apart from Singapore and New York. So, what is your sort of mathematically, what does your financial equation look like today? And how are you investing on your way to reaching that point of fire?
Okay, this is the part where it's stupid. No, but one, to clarify, I know for a fact that I will not be retiring in London. It's not my retirement destination. So the first step is figuring out, if you do retire, one, where do you want your base to be? And two, do you want to like fully retire, or do you want to still like do something on the side? Like a lot of my friends, they retire and they open like a cafe in Himachal or something like that, which again, that's an important question, because then you have to figure out if you
Right.
also have that number for the investment that you need to make for that. So breaking down the numbers a little bit, I was sharing earlier that there are these three components. And to me, the most important thing is that emergency part, and that's covered usually by a good health insurance program you get. But still, like you keep a good figure for any sort of emergency. And in my mind, it has always been, let's say things go wrong and my insurance doesn't work and all of that, there should be a don't touch fund. I call it a don't touch fund. Like this is a fund that I've just locked away, and like only for health emergencies is like a good 50 lakhs, just in case you have some serious stuff. And if not, one thing I also recommend is write a proper will, so that if, let's say, you're not using it, you want to make sure that it's going to somewhere or someone more important. But that's from a numbers perspective. That don't touch fund to me has always been about 50 lakhs. Just keep it there. Second, have your base sorted out. Like it could vary depending on what your accommodation style is. You want to have a proper house. You just want to like an apartment that you've invested somewhere. And so the price there, like a figure, I don't have a specific figure. I do have mine sorted out back in Kerala. So that is there. Third, like your living expenses when you retire, right? And that's where you want to think about, are you fully retiring and where are you going to be? And this is just purely my numbers. I don't look at how much do I have. I look at what is my passive income in a month. So when I retire and I'm not working, I'm not actively getting any income. Passive income could be from equity, could be from debt, could be from real estate rentals, whatever. And with the kind of lifestyle that I have, where I still love to travel, I still love to see those things, I've given myself, and this is assuming that my base is Kerala. So that's a very important factor where I know the cost of living and all that. I've told myself that, hey, you need a good 2.5 to 3 lakhs per month to live the same lifestyle, to continue traveling and all of that. That figure always has been 2.5 to 3 lakhs of passive income per month. So how much of investment do you need to get that passive income? It depends on your model. My investment model, I'll be very honest, has been very heavily like debt-based, like deposits. And I'm invested in a couple of small companies in Kerala and all of that. I'm now diversifying into equity a little bit, but I've always been never been too fond of taking huge risks. So any equity investments I have I'm sure they're like very safe bets. So risk is lower for people's perspective. If there's somebody who likes to take big rewards, I'm sure they could be like a 50% or more in terms of equity. My equity has always been like about, I would say, 5 to 10% of my overall investment, not more than that, because I'm happy with like less risk, less reward. I'm okay with that. There's still a commitment. So that's just my model. It doesn't work for everyone. And important to highlight that, again, in my numbers, I'm just calculating for like my own. I don't have dependents to factor. So if you have dependents, I know somebody else who actually is going through the fire stage right now, but they have kids and family and all of that. So her figure is actually higher because she also has to ensure that the kid gets a proper education and everything. So she's taking a much higher that passive income level or a target than I have. Yeah, those things factor in as well. Is that, I don't know, that's the best of my numbers understanding of this. If you ask me where I am, I think I'm halfway there. Or, yeah,
In
probably a
in
few more
terms
years.
of passive income
Yeah.
sources that you mentioned, you spoke about fixed deposits and debt. Hence, also investment properties or no?
I do have, yeah, a couple of investment properties back home. One of them is the future plan that I set for like a base. Yeah, just rent
Got
it
it.
out and stuff.
And I mean, I know that Kerala itself is like you could possibly imagine having different standards of living or different cost of living within different parts of Kerala. So I know, for example, like Kochi is probably one of the places where you might end up spending a little bit more, but then there would be other places where you could, from like a daily spending perspective, it wouldn't really need a 2.5 to 3 lakh per month, at least on today's prices. But you
Yeah.
did clarify that includes some of your travel expenses as well. So for somebody who's looking at Kerala as a potential retirement destination, is there a range of that cost of living that they
Yeah.
might consider?
So to be like this right now, and this is not factoring inflation potentially that over the next 5 to 10 years and all of that. I think people that retire in Kerala, and if they have a minimum of 30 to 40,000 of income per month, that's all you need. It's a really low cost. But like I said, my expenses factor in. I don't think I'll always be in Kerala, like throughout the month or throughout the week even. I do plan to move around, and that involves transportation, all of those things. But I know people who have taken the proper retirement life and they live anything from comfortably with anything from 30,000 to 50,000 as long as they have their own home and they're just taking care of their life expenses and stuff. So that's a good figure if you're living in Kerala, and that doesn't include like a rental cost, which obviously is going to be higher. So that's where the accommodation or the base factor comes in. As long as that is taken care of for a good 30 to 50,000, I think you're set for your monthly expenses.
Awesome. We are in about a person who push to ask them. Many investments are metals and gold, bro.
I have never trusted gold. And sorry whether it's anybody who's listening to this, but I don't know. Gold is something. It's something my parents always told me invest in gold. I don't know why I've never trusted that area at all. I'm like, no, this just seems like a blind faith thing. So never invested in metals or gold or anything. It has just been. It's certain things. It's a mindset thing. I'm not a huge high reward person. I'd rather go low risk, low reward. So like crypto or gold and all of that. I'm like, okay, good for you if it's working out, but yeah, not my cup of tea.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but I know in the family is into gold.
It's a culture thing. I think across all parts of India, I think gold is just, it has a special place. I've recently, for some reason, caught on some kind of a gold fever, so I've just been piling my. I don't know why even, but yeah, gold definitely has some kind of a allure behind beyond just being like an investment. I think it's just something about it. Hard to explain or put into words. Last question to you, Abhilash. So from your current, like, how much are you able to, with your current lifestyle in London, how much are you able to generally save? And you can give like a range or a percentage if you want to. And then where do you park that money? Like even with fixed deposits and everything else, do you keep a large portion of your money in the UK, or do you generally send most of your money back to India to be invested in different vehicles and options?
So your first question in terms of what's a good percentage of saving. So what works for me, and this is what I'm able to put aside like a good 25 to 30% of my money into This varies for seasonality. Yeah, at Christmas you're traveling. So another, like whenever there's a month where you're like traveling a little bit, obviously that 30% becomes more like 5%. But a good, I think 25 to 30% you can always park it away in savings. And I distribute my deposits in such a way that I do have a FCNR account in UK where I keep most of it. But then I also have family back home. So I still have my parents, and as part of sending them some money, I also have like certain investment decisions I take where I'm like, okay, let's move a portion of this. If I have to break it down, I think a good 60 to 70% of mine is FCNR here in UK itself, and the remaining 30 something I move it out, and then I figure out what to do with it. The one key exception is ESOPs in the US, because most companies, it doesn't make sense if your stocks are vesting in US to transfer that US to UK. Instead, just want to transfer it from US to India directly, because it makes a lot more sense. So there, yeah, it's an exception. I just directly move over to India. But yeah, for my local, whatever my paycheck, predominantly like a UK based, which as long as it's FCNR, I know at some point of time I can always take care of it when I go.
And quick follow up on the ESOPs, like different people have different opinions. Some people have this concept of just sell on West and then put it into like other avenues that you're more comfortable with. They don't want to take like the concentration risk of having too much of their net worth tied up into just one company stock. And there are obviously other people who are like hardcore, they love the company and they're like, I'll just hold on to this for as long as I can. Which camp do you fall in?
So there's an ex-Meta employee I follow called Andre Nadar. I think he was a PM, and he gives amazing financial advice to people from fund companies, especially those based in US. I think a lot of his investment advice is for those who were based in US and stuff, but really good. And he has this thing. Yes, you sell as soon as it rests. Then you diversify. And I'll be honest, if because followed that, I think, yeah, I know it sounds difficult to say, but I think it's sound financial advice. No, you want to actually inspire your plus to this thing. So yeah, always been from the
Makes
camp,
sense.
the first one.
And I know we are talking about, I do believe he's left the company and he's now doing something pretty cool elsewhere as well. But yes, I remember all the analysis and all the charts that he used to post in like our investing ad. Definitely, if he's dishing out advice, it's worth it.
Yeah. He runs a newsletter right now that's actually catering to like fund employees, like not specifically, but highly to like expat fund employees in the US. Because a lot of his advice is for US centric. How do you use your Roth and your IRA and all of that? So may not apply to me in London or you in Singapore, but generally in terms of West and sell, I think his advice has been really useful, and I generally agree with his guidance on that.
Absolutely. All right. Cool. That brings us to the end of our conversation for today, Abhilash. But it was amazingly fun. I think I learned a lot. Would love to have you again. And of course, offline, expect me to reach out with a bunch of questions and follow ups as well about your time away and your time in the Caribbean and all of your amazing like life experiences. Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. This has been a very special episode. Hopefully, you all learned a lot, enjoyed listening to the conversation. And with that, we'll be back very soon with another freshly brewed episode of Chai Pe Kharcha. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.